go. Now we're live. So welcome to our viewers and welcome to my guest. I'm really happy that you are joining me. So we have Robert. Most of you will know him under Drop of Irish on Instagram. We got Omar from and we got Dan, which is a cool friend of mine, and you will know him as a McNura brand ambassador as well on Instagram. And a special guest today, we have Face, who is European brand ambassador from Teeling. So, hi guys, nice that you are here with me. And we
Happy to
also
join
have someone here. And we also have someone from Canada. Cool. Hi there. So, as a fun fact, Dan never tasted Teeling before. So we thought that we start with the small batch from the room cup and see what Dan will say. So, Chris, if you could tell something about Teeling in general, if you want to, just like to lead through the whiskey.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose anybody who is tuning in, do let us know if you can hear us and see us. Maybe just give us a hello in the comments or a thumbs up. And Holly, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be with all you tonight. No better way to spend a Friday evening with some cracking drams of friends. So this one is our flagship premium blend called the Teeling Small Batch. I know small batch to many people, it's quite a relative term. So from one company to the next, small batch can be 1,000 barrels or even 10,000 barrels. For us, a Teeling whiskey small batch is hand selecting between about 55 to 75 casks in total as our starting off point. Now we take a 3 parts corn, 1 part barley distillate, blend them together and age them in ex-American bourbon barrels for up to 6 years. We then choose the best of those 55 to 75 casks and blend those together before further aging them in rum casks. Now, specifically Central American rum. So we've sort of tested the water with lots of different styles from Jamaican, from Spanish style if we're looking at Cuban, or even Nicaragua or Dominican Republic, and even further afield looking at agricole rum. So it's constantly changing up. At the end of the process, we take our rum casks, again choosing the highest quality and blending those together. So it's twice aged, twice blended, kind of getting 2 bites of the cherry. But it'd be interesting to see what you guys think in terms of the taste, in terms of the actual, the profile of the whiskey.
So then let's see.
So it's bottled at 46% ABV is the kind of the first thing to note. Obviously 46%, it's going to carry through a lot more in the palate. You get a much kind of denser, more thicker mouthfeel. This was kind of our first point of difference from other Irish blends, and we really wanted to, look to lead the category and do things a little bit differently, how we made our whiskey in comparison to other brands. And it's also non-chill filtered.
Great. So any of the viewers had these small batch as well? Just write in the chat, that would be quite interesting. Anyway, you can ask whatever you want to. So just feel free to write in the live chat and I hope to keep up. Okay, we'll see. So Dan, it's your turn, as it's your first Teeling as well.
Well, it isn't the first one, because I had run for a few years as it was on a whiskey fair in Belgium.
Nice.
But it might be that I had a pretty strong run before, and that's why the taste wasn't that good at the moment for me. But the nose is pretty cool.
Nice. Out of interest, what whiskey show was it in Belgium?
The Spirits of the Sky.
Oh, Spirits of the Sky. Sweet, yeah. I'm sure that will make anybody listening very nostalgic and just be even more travel sick. Us talking about whiskey festivals, but yeah, it's a great one. I don't know if the rest of you guys have done it before.
Is it a huge one? I never visited that one.
Yeah, one of the biggest in Belgium. So between that and Spa, which is now discontinued, they were kind of the two biggest in Belgium. You've got a couple of smaller ones as well, places like Liège and Ghent. But Spirits in the Sky in Brussels will kind of be one of the biggest ones. So I'm sure, you know, as you rightly said, it depends what you tasted beforehand, and maybe at the festival, like many of us, you know, probably sampled a couple of things beforehand. Now that you're trying it fresh, I think that the key things that you should look out for is that rum raisin on the nose. You know, those tropical fruits like dates and figs. And then when you get down to that palate, it's that really viscous, really creamy, thick mouthfeel that you'll get from that 46% and non-chill filtration that carries through to the finish. And that sort of intermingles a little bit with the inherent sweetness that you get from those ex-bourbon barrels. So the honeysuckle, the maple syrup, the kind of butter tones.
Chris, is it true that the small batches comes from like stocks of the Teeling family as well?
Yeah, so I suppose anyone who's familiar with our story, you'll know that we have an old family reserve that dates back from the late 1980s. You know, we first got into the industry around 1987 when our two founders, Jack and Stephen, worked with their father, a man called John Teeling, who, you know, arguably reinvented the wheel for Irish whiskey in many respects. He brought back a lot of prestigious Irish whiskey brands, as well as introducing new ones at the time. And they sort of worked together as a family for about 10 years before selling off the distillery in 2011. But they decided to keep about 16,000 barrels to set up in Dublin. And as a result, you know, we've got a really extensive portfolio from whiskey that's, you know, 3 years old all the way up as far as 37 years old. So
Oh, wow.
it makes it fun for people like myself and yourself, Holly, who get to talk about, you know, this big spectrum of whiskies.
Yeah.
So Chris, that was the Cooley distillery. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was Cooley, Omar. Yeah, which encompassed Kilbeggan, Connemara, Tyrconnell. So, you know, some fantastic Irish single malts during the 80s and 90s. And with ourselves, we're facing this really interesting question where previously, you know, we worked off the majority of an old stock. We're now looking at our own Dublin distillate, which is coming from its infancy, you know, from 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And we're kind of facing the question of, well, what cask types work well for the whiskey the way we're making it now. And a great example is the evolution of the Trinity and of the small batch, how that's going to change over time.
That's right. And so, sorry, one last. Obviously from selling of the Cooley distillery, Teeling, I think you touched on this, you were able to get your own sort of collection of more aged whiskies. You were able to barrel.
Yeah, so I suppose, you know, it was their whiskey in essence. They decided to sell the Cooley distillery to Jim Beam in 2011, who were having a merger with Suntory, who are now, you know, Beam Suntory. And as part of that, they were able to keep approximately about 16,000 barrels and transitioned into now Teeling Whiskey Company. So as part of that stock, you know, we've some barrels in the warehouse that date back as far as 1991 and even older. You know, as I said, the kind of oldest whiskey in our portfolio at the moment is the Teeling 37-year-olds. For anybody who's watching or listening who has had the fortunate opportunity to try it, please do let us know. I'm sure they're far and few between. But yeah, essentially started with Cooley. Jack and Stephen decided to venture off on their own and really look at sort of, you know, making their own mark in the Irish whiskey industry. Like at the time, in the 1980s, Irish whiskey was very much synonymous with one particular archetype when it came to whiskey. Typically, it was, you know, all about triple distillation, focusing on, you know, 40% ABV bottlings, and typically you'd be looking into sort of three main foundations when it came to maturation, which were port, bourbon, or sherry. So we looked at kind of turning this on its head. Obviously, the small batch is really the starting point for all of this, and it's kind of the cornerstone of innovation in many respects. And that, you know, in 2015, there was very few Irish whiskey commercially available in rum, and bottle of 46% as well was a game changer.
So we have a question from Basil, which has something to do with the stout Teeling, which I like very much as well. He is asking, he picked a Teeling Stout cask finish today, so cheers to that, my friend. And he is asking which kind of stout Teeling is used, or is that a secret?
Is it a deep secret? I love it. Yeah, no, I think the great thing about the whiskey industry is getting more transparent day by day, and I can tell you where the stout comes from. This is a really interesting one. So the Teeling Stout cask basically stemmed from our exploration of different cask types, using the small batch as kind of our control whiskey. So you guys know yourself, if you're doing any kind of experimentation, you always need a control. Otherwise, how do you learn from that? So we decided to use our small batch in that circumstance and sort of test the water with all of these different seasoned casks, ranging from the weird and wonderful to the more traditional. Like a perfect example, most recently we're experimenting with aquavit casks, which were incredibly unusual, incredibly interesting. But the stout cask was a kind of a small scale collaboration we did with an Irish brewery called Galway Bay. So Galway, it's on the west coast of Ireland. They're an absolutely cracking brewery. If you've never heard of them, do check out some of their stuff. They do everything from pale ales, red ales, stouts, imperial stouts, anything,
they are
you name
awesome.
it.
I love them.
They're really, really great. And they produced a barrel-aged imperial stout called 200 Fathoms, which was about 9.6% ABV. So as you can imagine, you could really only have about 1 or 2 bottles of this stuff, but it was definitely worth it. And that was aged in our small batch barrels. We then received those back with the imperial stout and matured our whiskey in it. So that's where they're coming from Galway Bay.
And we have another question from a Drum Divided. He's asking if the sommelier selection red wine cask will be available again.
The sommelier selection again was kind of an extension. Oh, you have one, yeah. So that was for
yes.
for the French market and for Sweden as well, are the two main countries that you'll find it. Although it did kind of make its way over to places like Switzerland, and you probably saw a bit of stock trickle into Germany as a result. This again was kind of it was kind of an extension again of the collaborations where we wanted to work specifically with some of the very high quality wineries around the world, and predominantly in areas in France is where we sort of homed in. So this was the first of the series, working with some Margaux casks, which was an absolutely stunning end result. Unfortunately, we won't be replicating or reproducing this series again. So any of that's completely sold through, won't be made again. But I can tell you there will be a second edition coming very soon, sort of mid-February, for both the likes of France and Sweden. So you can definitely look out for that. That's all I'll say on that before I jump the gun and give away all the trade secrets.
So you can looking forward to it. That's great. But why it's not in Germany? I would love to try that as well. Or is it like similar to the Pinot Noir, like a German exclusive thing? Or then
no, it's a really good question, Holly. It actually did kind of come from a reaction to the German exclusives, like the Riesling and the Pinot Noir. We wanted to look at doing a French equivalent, and we managed to get our hands on these really exceptional casks. With the German one that I'm mentioning, of course, that was with and apologies for my pronunciation, the Reichstadt von Bull, which are a biodynamic German winery based in Deidesheim, not too far actually from Mannheim in Germany. So this particular winery, we sourced some of their Riesling casks at first, and most recently now we've collaborated with them using some Pinot Noir, which I know that you've tasted, Holly.
Or Iserlohner tasting said, never ever tasted it before. Do you mean the Teeling one, Iserlohner tastings, or the small batch in particular, or Teeling in general? We'll see what he says. So we got, but that's my feeling as well. Oh, Chris is gone, and here we go again.
Gone.
Ah, here we go.
Sorry, it jumped out there for a second.
Ah, yeah, no worries. That's my feeling in general about the series. Like a lot of the German guys never tasted the Teeling one, and it's pretty cool to have these live stream to see if we can convince them.
No, absolutely. And I think, look, if you're new to the brand, I definitely recommend starting off with the Trinity series. Each of these are really our best foot forward in the respective categories in Irish whiskey. So, behind me, you've got the single grain on the farther side, corn-based whiskey. Middle, you've got a blend, and then the end, you've got a single malt. So there really kind of is a whiskey for everyone. We don't, I suppose, preach that idea of one disruptive serve or one whiskey that you should drink. We like to promote the idea of diversity and choice. But that's definitely where I'd say if you've never tried our whiskey, get your hands on a bottle of small batch or the single pot still or the single grain. And then if you want to try some of the more exclusive, market releases, you've got the likes of the Pinot Noir in Germany or the Smiley Select in Sweden.
Yeah. So my muser said he visited Teeling in 2019, and it was a great tour and a great shop. And I saw that you won the Prize of Ireland for the best visitor experience. Congrats for that.
Well, no, we really appreciate anybody saying that, and obviously during these very challenging times, it's great to have a bit of a lift like that. So of course, in the Irish Icons, we won the best visitor experience or distillery experience. So no, it's a fantastic team, at the distillery, and I think it really hats off to them, and I think it's a lot of hard work paid off. But we're definitely really looking forward to welcoming people back, through our doors. Fingers crossed in the near future. I personally am really looking forward to showing people around again and getting down to the warehouse and traveling, of course.
Yeah, I hope so. Jeff is asking, hang on, if there's another crazy finish coming out, if you know something.
If there's another crazy finish, yeah, I think when we talk about team, the answer is always yes. At the moment in our warehouse, we've over 100 different expressions. Everything from schnapps, aquavit, ginger beer, vermouth. You've got more traditional like sherry, port, Madeira, Carcavelos. We've experimented now with different wood variants. So the likes of acacia and amberana, chinkapin, chestnut. There's the great thing is there's always a lot of new releases. We did very strong last year in NPD, and I think the most recent one that I'm very, very excited about, of course, relevant to Germany is the Black Pits, which is coming obviously very, very soon. But there's always plenty to look out for.
Yeah, and Rüdiger is asking, or just make a recommendation like a finish in, or I can't spell that. Franconian wine cask. I have no clue of wine, so I have no idea if I spelled that correctly.
So I suppose with wine casks, we've kind of looked abroad a lot. So it's a really interesting comment there. There's a lot of good producers, particularly of mead in Ireland, which is starting to make a bit of a resurgence. And there's some great producers at the moment. But to date, we've looked kind of more towards the likes of France and Germany, Australia, and then Italy are kind of the main areas that we've been looking for wine casks. The likes of Marsala, the likes of Sauternes, regional dessert wine from the south of France. But I'm sure, knowing Alex and knowing the team, they're always open to experimenting with new things and testing the waters. In saying that, for us, it's really not a gimmick. We don't just like to churn out these sort of crazy cask finishes. It is really a learning process for ourselves where at the end of the day, we are looking to create the best whiskey that we possibly can. So we take every whiskey that we make as a learning process that sort of informs us on how we make our whiskey going forward. Perfect example of that, mentioning the Black Pits. This started off as the 21-year-olds for Teeling many, many years ago, back in the days when the Teeling family, were just kind of getting into it. And the 21-year-old was a single malt that was matured in Sauternes casks and at a small percentage of peat. So, of course, we had no idea what this whiskey would eventually become. It spent a little bit more time in casks and grew up to be the 24-year-old of Teeling, which, of course, picked up the best single malt at the World Whiskey Awards there a couple of years ago. and is now, aged for 4 years longer and is a 28-year-old single malt. So that Sauternes and peat influence is really what sort of dictated how we would go forward with the likes of the black pits. So I don't want anybody thinking that, it is just these weird and wonderful casks that we throw in the mix for our own amusement. It is to really kind of perfect our process all the time.
That was one of our subscribers' questions. They were like saying, are the casks that you get, are they just like gimmicks, or are you just trying to influence the whiskey because it's young? But as you've mentioned, it's a learning process for you.
No, and it's a very fair point. Like, I think there was maybe 5 years ago, people would have seen this as a box ticking exercise. It was a trend where these unusual cask types were a little bit of a novelty. Whereas, we first started off kind of from basics as just an exploration of rum casks when we started, for example, with our collaborations. Like, I know we were chatting before this, you said you tried the pineapple rum.
Yeah.
The pineapple rum cask from Teeling came out from us experimenting different styles of rum that we hadn't used in our core product. So, Alex was kind of saying to himself, what would Irish whiskey be like if we paired it up with agricole rum? How would that herbaceous sort of herbal element change our whiskey in a different direction? Or what if we used, let's say the likes of Jamaican rum, which is more higher in esters, has that real tropical influence. And we've had a great partnership with Plantation and with Alexander Gabriel from Maison Ferrand in the past. So that's just one example of where we were looking to push it even further and see, could we improve even better? And then from that came all these different products.
So Robert and Omar, what are your favorite crazy cask finishes from Teeling?
Well, I like the traditional pot still one, and
I love that.
And then I think the pineapple rum cask has taken, above all. I do like my cask influences. I do like when the Jamesons did their cask mates, although you don't want to hear about them. But I do like the different cask influence of the pineapple.
That's cool. What about you? What do you like for the finishes?
So the same. Yeah. Oh, you're trying to that.
Robert, you are on unmute.
Yeah, sure. Always on mute. I've been injured by 1 or 2 meetings in my work, so I'm unmuted when I'm not supposed to talk. My boss told me.
Oh, you are allowed to talk here.
I'm allowed to talk. Thank you very much. Sherry is my favorite, I think. Always sherry.
Oh yeah. I tasted that as a sample and it was delicious. I never had sherry oak before, so that was kind of mind blown. I really love that one.
Yeah, I'm on this right now, so this is a finish, and this is probably my 2020 favorite, I think.
Oh, cool.
The 4th was released this year, so yeah, I'm a bit. I'm shopping it around, so I'm waiting for release here in Sweden, perhaps, so I can. Get
so we got another question for type of cask. How do you choose that? Chris, you told us that you are quite experimental, but is there any plan why you choose this cask or the other?
Yeah, so as I said, certain cask selections come from exploring one particular category, and in the instance of the rum casks, as I mentioned, this is really looking to expand upon I suppose our repertoire or our arsenal of rum flavors that we already had. In the past, we used a lot of rum barrels that came from Nicaragua, as well as different regions throughout Central America. And with this particular one, we really wanted to see if we could improve on that. With the other cask types, it really came from a question of what was used in Irish whiskey previously. And, a lot of Irish whiskey historically has been matured in either port, bourbon or sherry barrels. So the great thing about Irish whiskey laws is they're so loose, out of probably all of the 4 or 5 big players, if you want to include Canada, US, Scots, Japanese, Irish and Canada, I think the Irish probably have one of the biggest flexibility when it comes down to our maturation laws. Like, we can mature Irish whiskey in first fill, second fill, third fill, fourth fill barrels. It doesn't have to be virgin oak like America. We can also use, wide variety of different woods, not like in Scotland where they have to use oak. We can use a spectrum of different ex-alcohols. So this came from, okay, we have all of these different opportunities. Where do we start? And that's really where it first came about. Alex, he has a background, obviously, as a master brewer before becoming a master distiller. He started working from the age of 16 in craft breweries in Portland, Oregon. So any of you who are big craft beer nerds like myself, you'll know that Portland kind of was the hub of, I suppose, innovation back in the 80s and 90s. It really is kind of heralded as one of the places where the American sort of IPA was born. And one of the first breweries that Alex worked was the Bridgeport Brewery in Portland, Oregon, where he said there was a load of experimentation at the time. And from that, he got his doctorate or his master's at the Heriot-Watt University in brewing and distilling. And he's actually been Teeling's first employee. So he was with us from the days of Cooley in the 1980s, working with Jack and Stephen. He was head of innovations at the Cooley Distillery, and he's now our master distiller, master blender. But I think he's kind of kept that sort of spirit of experimentation as he's gone along in his career. And that's really where it stems from, this constant need to search for new flavors.
Yeah, cool. Basil just said that he loved the small batch. Dan, what about you? You already tasted it. What do you think?
I did. The glass is already empty.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, I think it's lovely sweetness, and the spiciness at the tip of the tongue is cool as well. So it's, for me, a good starter. I think it's good as a bottle here.
Yeah, it's like a good everyday dram, or if you have beginners, because it's not that spicy. You know what I mean? Like the pot still, which is quite spicy and peppery. So I think, yeah, for beginners, it's a nice one as well. Sometimes for me it's too sweet, but that's just because I like spicy whiskeys.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting about it as well is, for someone like yourself who might find it too sweet, it will actually evolve from batch to batch. So,
Yeah.
For example, I don't know what bottles you have at home, but from 2018 to 2019, there will be slight variations in the liquid.
I've got batch SB45. Also, yeah. Okay. That's quite interesting. I will keep for that. Then I get another batch as well to have a comparison. I didn't know that.
Yes, so that's when you start to get really nerdy about it, when people are collecting batches to batches of even the core range. But I can tell you, there are slight micro differences between each. We have obviously tried to keep a certain level of consistency, but yeah, that's really what small batch means to us, is constantly changing that up and constantly improving.
Oh, cool.
So small batch to you guys is about 6,000, under 6,000 bottles. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so we'd be talking roughly between 55 to 75 casks. So yeah, we would do a release on a biannual and annual basis. The interesting thing about it is we base it off quality. So you'll notice, for example, Omar, there's no age statements. Like, it doesn't say 5 or 6 or 7. That's not us trying to be difficult or to avoid questions of age. It's really because we want to put the quality first. So sometimes, within that blend, you might have casks that have come from a previous selection that weren't quite good at the time, but maybe after, let's say, 7 or 8 years, might be really hitting their peak, and we might use those as opposed to, let's say, ones that have literally just been taken out of the cask after 5 years or 6 years.
That's understandable. I mean, also in your whiskies, even though they don't have an age statement, they do say on the labels that they're non-chill filtered and there's no added colouring on them as well. So that's a big bonus, kudos points, definitely to you guys there.
Yeah, and you'll definitely notice that with the likes of the single pot still, or even with the single malt. Anything with a high malt component, that the non-chill filtration really starts to show in the glass. Like if you look at the tiers, or even if you're inspecting it, you'll notice it from a whiskey that's non-chill filtered.
So do you have any idea, or what are your thoughts of the Craft Irish Whiskey Company with their pricey releases? Any ideas to that?
Sorry, what was that question?
Jeff is asking, what are Teeling's thoughts of the Craft Irish Whiskey Company with the very pricey releases?
Oh, the Craft Irish Whiskey Company. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, yeah, I think there's always going to be that obstacle in the secondary market, but I think for ourselves, we just continue to do our own thing, and yeah, that's all I'll say on that.
So I would say let's go to the next one. Dan, what's your choice?
Well, I poured the Pinot Noir cask in my glass.
So that's
you
a
did
German
it as well?
exclusive one. Yeah. I love this. I don't like wine, but I love this whiskey. And a lot were like, I can't buy it.
Wine finishing
there's
on
definitely
whiskey is a
market
pretty cool
outside
thing.
Germany. Yeah, it is. You like wine cask finishes in general?
I do. I've tried some around 3 or 4 different ones, and in general, it's a pretty interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Robert, Uma, what about you? Do you like wine finishes?
Yeah, we have a love-hate relationship. They're a bit hit and miss with me, unfortunately. I can see where they go with them, but they don't. I would just prefer a standard bourbon or like a rum cask finish, for example.
Yeah. Can admit
Yeah, I think
that.
the really interesting thing with this one is it definitely evolves. Like with some wine-influenced whiskies, for starters, you often get on the palate what you smell on the nose, and I think with this, there's just a complete cut. Like there's so much of a contrast between what you're smelling and what you're tasting, so it kind of keeps your interest the more you delve into it. As well as that, it's very much I think starts to get bigger and bolder as you get further into the taste. Like you'll see when you get down to having a sample of it, it starts off quite sweet and light, almost kind of like artificial red fruit. So like one tasting note I always throw out to people, and it's super esoteric and specific, but it's bubblegum. Cherry bubblegum on the nose and in the palate. That really quickly evolves into these really mature red fruits, like maraschino cherries, plums, or nectarines. There's also a little bit of spice, which I think is really nice in the nose. That kind of rounds it off and gives it a lot more complexity, like tobacco or leather. And then tannins kind of sit as well at the back of your palate. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. We'll have a taste and give me your thoughts.
I love that one because you have like a very fruity nose, and again you find that in the palate as well. And I really like that combination with the spiciness you mentioned. I really love that. So I'm really not a wine fan, but I love those finishes because you have the components of the whiskey and of the wine, and that's a really nice interaction for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the others like wine finishes as well.
This, of course, was 12 months in those Pinot Noir casks. So we're talking about 6 years in American bourbon barrels, and then 12 months in Pinot Noir. And the winery themselves are, they're fantastic. They have a lot of kind of synergies with Teeling in the sense that, they're a family-owned company, they're small scale, craft producer, and they've a history that dates back like 150 years. So really, really long heritage. But we first got in contact with these back in 2017, and I still remember trying their Riesling casks that we used for our one of our whiskies in the back of the distillery in the operations room. And obviously you get the typical like white wine notes, the citrus, the lemon zest, the lime skins, and I had that kind of inherent fruitiness to it. But I was just really blown away by the kind of grassy quality that it had on the whiskey, and really did not expect it. So we went back to them with these Pinot Noir casks, and again, I think it's just a very, very unique product.
It is, and a lot of my friends that are not in Germany, they are really like, oh, Teeling needs to release that anywhere. I want to try
Yeah, I
that.
suppose this is always the problem, isn't it? That when they are so successful that they're unfortunately only in limited releases in certain cases. But I suppose the good news is the fact that we are constantly working with a variety of different producers. In many cases there are these limited releases in different markets. Perfect example: the Smiley Select in France and Sweden versus the Pinot Noir in Germany.
Yeah, true. So Dan, what are your thoughts about the German exclusive?
Well, I think you confessed me on Teeling by the first of the two whiskies.
Oh yeah, tastes like whiskey for you.
Well,
Mission solved.
it's fruity in the nose and the palate as well, but you get this spiciness in the finish as well. So it's a lot of flavors compared and combined with each other. And it's a pretty interesting thing.
It is, for sure. Well, but do you have any recipes? Just say it again.
What I was about to ask Chris. Yeah, the next masterclass I've heard will be including the Renaissance 3.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it will be done with, in addition to be able to taste the wines that's been influenced on the whiskies. You have any? Is it a surprise to you? Did I surprise you now, or have you seen?
No, sorry, I'm honestly listening intently. Yeah, so we will have, you're dead right. We have a masterclass coming up on the Renaissance series. With the Renaissance in comparison to the small batch collaborations, the small batch are all about testing the water of atypical casks and really leaning back into our flagship whiskey and showing that Irish whiskey can be a great canvas to take on all of these other flavors. The Renaissance were all single malts. Again, constantly making things a little bit left of center, but slightly higher age statements. Like we're looking at kind of 18 years and above. And for each of them, we looked specifically at either wines or fortified wines from around the world. So Renaissance 1 was matured in bourbon and finished in Madeira. Number 2 was Australian Shiraz wine casks. And then 3 we will have very, very shortly. We're going to have that masterclass at the end of this month. So that will be through our global Facebook page. If you're looking to still purchase tickets, as far as I'm aware, I hope I won't regret this. They are still available. You can look out for them. Just check out any of Teeling's social media. I'm sure you can find them. But no, that's brilliant. So you're attending it, Robert?
Yeah, and I read on Robert Caldwell, the global VA, that he's also including the wines. So that's a very interesting take on it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, the logistics of this have been something that we've really had to work hard on, and it's hats off to Rob and the team. It's great when you get an experience like that over the line. I think it's going to be a fantastic night. There's going to be a guest speaker who's talking more on the wine influence, and obviously Alex and Rob going through each of the whiskeys. So with this particular series, it is going to continue for a while, but this was sort of our take on Irish single malts.
Cool. Chris, do you know Marianne is from Canada, Ontario, and she's asking if there's like a distribution soon. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so LCBO would be your big one, Marion, that you can look out for. You'll predominantly find it in liquor stores. I'm trying to think of any of your locals, but LCBO would be our distributor in Canada. So the good news is you can find a bottle of the good stuff over there. They also do have, speaking of these limited releases, they of course have, the Trinity range, but they do also have one of the Teeling collaborations we did with that Galway Bay brewery. So using some strong ale casks. There was some wee heavy strong ale, which is a style of beer that's quite malt forward and low in hops. And the result was super, really, really interesting. But yeah, that's where I'd recommend you to check out.
Cool. And hello to Canada. Wow. All right. Are we going to the next one?
I just have another question for Chris. I mean,
Yeah,
I know
sure.
all these whiskies with these different cask types. How likely is it to obviously depend on sales? Is for Teeling to release another one of the going through the same process?
Yeah, I mean, so it is very possible is the honest answer, and I think when it's appropriate and when it makes sense, we will definitely look to do it. I think with a lot of these, they've made sense working with companies who share the same ethos as ourselves. So it's obviously very dependent on our partners if they would like to do it again, first and foremost. But yeah, for sure, I think a great example. We just recently collaborated with what are the guys' names? The Sun Tavern, using some Umbrella Brewing Company ginger beer casks, and that's something that we're in the midst of talking on, redoing. So definitely for sure, the cask innovation is definitely just one area that we're looking at. So on top of that, we're experimenting with a lot of specialty grains as well, using the likes of chocolate malt or even the less obscure like rye and wheat, and seeing what direction we can bring in that way. So I suppose that the casks are fascinating to talk about, but they are just sort of one area that we're looking at the moment. We actually dedicate about 33%, so a third of our overall production goes exclusively to experimenting. So you can imagine in the distillery, 1/3 of your time you can run loose and kind of do whatever you like and see how you can test out these new things.
It's interesting. So, sorry, carry on, Holly.
No, just say.
So with the you kind of like following the Americans' footsteps in regards to categorizing, doing the rye, the wheats, and like mixtures of your obviously your barley as well, and different ones.
Yeah, I suppose within Ireland you still have your kind of 4 key categories: like pot still, malt, blended whiskey, and grain whiskey. With grain whiskey, the legal definition is anything that's not 100% malt. So that obviously allows us to experiment with the likes of rye and wheat. But historically in Ireland, and this is probably more importantly why companies like Teeling like to use these ingredients, is back in the 18th and 19th century, it was less about these strict regulations and more of a sort of a hodgepodge of different raw materials. Like if you think about it, Dublin is a perfect example. A lot of the areas are named after marketplaces where, in one market you'd find corn, the next you'd find meat, the next you'd find fish, the next you'd find timber. And a lot of farmers, a lot of, craftsmen would have gone from each to the next and traded in these raw materials. And as a result, a lot of the breweries and distilleries, naturally were combining the likes of wheat and oats and barley together. It wasn't necessarily, thought of as being an innovator or a trendsetter or a trailblazer, whatever you want to call it. It was simply, making beer and making whiskey. So I think there is kind of a looking back on that, and how can we get back to this idea of, focusing on flavor and combining these together. So our most recent innovations with grain types have been experimenting with what's called specialty malts. One perfect example is something called crystal malt, not to be confused with something else. It is a type of grain.
Not like crystal.
No,
it's another drug in a way.
So yeah, that's something that's used a lot in the brewing industry. That's very commonplace, for craft beer, but not as common in the whiskey industry. And of course, Alex being, previously and still a master brewer, he's really homing in on that for that area.
Ah, cool. So and there's a recommendation from Christian. He wants distribution in Argentina as well. He wants to try Teeling.
Oh yeah, Christian. Yeah, brilliant. What I would say is best thing to do is, even if you want to send me a message on Instagram or on social media or to my email, I'll more than happily get in touch with you and let you know where you can find it.
Cool. Awesome. And we have a question from Basil. For you, Chris, like a more private question. Are you basically interested in other whiskies from Ireland or Scotch, Japanese, or maybe German spirits?
No, I hate whiskey. I detest it. No, I'm only joking. Yeah, no, I'm not. I've always been very passionate about not just whiskey, but other brown spirits like rum and brandy and cognac. For me, obviously, my first and foremost being a native Irishman is obviously Irish whiskey, but I definitely do sample a lot of the other stuff on a regular basis. I suppose one of the perks of working in the industry and someone who has the lucky opportunity to travel, I've been exposed to a lot of wonderful whiskeys around the world. And I think the great thing about anybody who's looking to get into whiskey or may not have tried Irish whiskey or Scotch or Japanese is there's so much variety out there, and there's so much that each distillery are bringing to the table. A perfect example, in Ireland, there's now 38 distilleries in different levels of production, each with their unique point of difference, and each trying to do things a little bit differently. So for consumers, it's great times. If anything is positive during this last year and a half, is that there's always good whiskey on hand. And particularly in Ireland, it's still the fastest growing spirit in the world. So it's only going to start to get bigger and more readily accessible for brands like Teeling.
Wow, that's cool. And Sarah has another question. Can Teeling do more experimental whiskey than Scotch, given the difference in the rules between Scotland and Ireland? So is there a difference between the laws in Scotland and Ireland?
Yeah, so the big one will be wood, as I mentioned. I think there used to be this sort of folklore or misconception that in Ireland we matured for 3 years and 1 day, and in Scotland they matured for 3 years, because we thought that 24 hours would, arguably make us better. But this was, I think, just a kind of a bit of a joke between the two nations. It's now 3 years and 2 days, if anybody's asking. But no, I think the big difference is in terms of the most striking one is what type of wood we can use. So in Scottish whiskey legislation, you have to use oak wooden barrels. Now that can be anything from Spanish oak, American oak, Japanese oak. They do also allow some variations, like chinkapin, for example, is an Appalachian white oak that is a subspecies, but still of Quercus alba, still of oak wooden barrels. Whereas in Ireland, we can use chestnut, ash, pine, hickory, maple, amberana, mizunara, anything you really can put whiskey in. Arguably, you could test to make new whiskey. So what we've done with Teeling is we've created a lot of distillery exclusives where we've experimented with these alternative wood types. Most recently, we actually produced 300 bottles in Irish oak, which is quite limited. Believe it or not, there's actually not very many trees of Irish oak. It's a long story that I won't delve into tonight, but we gave all the proceeds back to charity, to frontline workers, at the start of the year, to try and give back to the community in our own way. And that's the most recent one that we've done. Previous ones we've had have been chestnut and also virgin Hungarian oak, which are both really different. Like, if you've never tried a whiskey globally from Scotland, Ireland, Canada, anywhere, if you've never tried a whiskey in a different style of wood, I definitely recommend it. Like chestnut, much more higher in tannins, so it's kind of a little bit similar to European oak. It's also higher in gallic acid, so it's a different taste, a different mouthfeel, different everything really.
So I would say we go for one more, and then our time will be up. Chris, a question from me. Why is there always 46% in the core range?
46%. So it actually came about from, it's a really good question. It came about first from, I suppose the short and long answer is a choice from Alex. We did a lot of taste tests at the very start, and so a lot of blind tasting of samples of our small batch. bottle of different ABVs, different cask types, and we did a consumer-focused tasting, getting a lot of feedback on essentially what they made of the whiskey. And one that kept coming out on top is the 46%. It also comes down to a more technical perspective in that at 46% or really 45 and above, we don't have to chill filter. But that's kind of the main reason we found that as our sort of sweet spot in terms of the mouthfeel, in terms of the flavor, but also still being accessible and still being, commercially savvy without doing cask strength after cask strength after cask strength, which nothing wrong with that. I know in Sweden, for example, and Robert, you'll attest to this, we talked about this before. Same with Ireland, cask strength is all the rage at the moment. Anything that's 50% or above, I think people are just looking at the ABV and then click to buy. It's very on trend at the moment.
Yeah, so I would say we go for the black pits. This is the quite interesting thing for the German followers. They were like, what, Teeling and a peated whiskey? What's going on there? So Chris, why did you do a peated whiskey?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I think I noticed a few people asking me in the comments about peat. So for us, this was our, to put in perspective, this was our second whiskey from our distillery in Newmarket Square. The distillery in Dublin was set up in 2015, so we're now celebrating our 6th year, which I just can't believe.
Wow.
I've been with the company since nearly the very start. It was 6 years in June. This was the second release from our distillery, and I think it's very telling as to Teeling's sort of prerogative that our second whiskey was a peated triple distilled single malt. This is a whiskey that we didn't want to just create a carbon copy of any of those fantastic peated single malts from Islay. We really wanted to put our own stamp and our own DNA on it. And in this circumstance, we looked at a combination of bourbon and Sauterne. As I mentioned, we were kind of influenced by the 21 and 24-year-olds of our family reserve, that we went with that. So the peat itself, when we got it, it was quite a high ppm. We're talking about 55 ppm, so quite heavy in terms of smoke. But the triple distillation does this really interesting thing where it's really reduces down the phenol content, but keeps a lot of the esters. So in English, what that basically means is, you don't get as much peat smoke and you get a lot more of the fruits. And the result is just this beautiful balance between sort of peat and sweet. You get the lovely Sauterne influence, the marzipan, apricots, honey. It's not that medicinal, that really iodine peat smoke. So if you're not a peat fan, this is not that. It's something completely left of center. It's more of a barbecue smoke. It's much more like the perfect one. And I know the minute that I say this, anybody trying it, you won't taste anything else. Charred pineapples. So if you think pineapples on a barbecue, that's really what you're getting. So on top of that, there also is a little bit of saltiness, but not too much. And a bottle of 46% ABV, as you rightly said, Holly, like the rest of the core range. But I think that Sauterne influence and the triple distillation for me is really what makes it. Like I recently sat in on a very interesting discussion only about a week ago on the developments of peated whiskey in Ireland, and I can tell you, there's about 18 distilleries who are experimenting with peated whiskey at the moment, or with peat in general, making either vodka or cutchine or whiskey. And some really, really incredible stuff out there. For me, what surprised me, trying Teeling side by side, is I really hadn't kind of appreciated the wine influence as much until I tried it side by side with these other, Irish peated expressions. So you'll notice that particularly at the front of the palate, there's a little bit of tannins on the lips, and it gives this really nice sort of dry finish that is almost masked by the peat a little bit. But you were talking, Robert, your dram of 2020. For me, the black bits, I'd waited for this for so long. I remember us starting distilling 4 or 5 years ago, and when it was finally released, I was more than happy to get my hands on the bottle.
Yeah, I can imagine that. It's really a nice one. And Jason is asking, where does the peat for the barley come from? Ireland?
Yes, it's a good question, Jason. It's coming from Glenesk in Speyside. So at the moment, there's actually very few. There's none really that have a commercially available single malt where the peat is coming from Ireland. It's how do I put it? It's down to politics, really. I think it is available. There's just not enough people making peated Irish whiskey in order to justify malting companies to make large bulks of it. So I think perhaps maybe in 5-10 years, we'll start to see a lot more peat coming from Ireland. I think it would be fantastic. And I know, Alex personally would love to see peated whiskey using Irish peat. But yeah, I can tell you at the moment it's outsourced.
Yeah, for me, the black pits is like you have to go away from the thinking that it's like an Isla, because it's completely different, which is awesome. And as you said, I think for people who doesn't like the peat that much, the black pits is perfect. But my question is, for someone who loves peat, do you know if there will be a black pit with more ppm?
The higher pit, it's a good question. At the moment, I couldn't tell you whether there will or whether there won't. I know that we experimented a lot with double distilling, which obviously retained a lot of the phenols. It's something I think possible for the future. I know there was also talk of cask strength, which again, cask strength peated whiskey is definitely something I'd be very interested in. But at the moment, honestly, no, there's no talk of a higher ppm. For us, it was really finding that balance between the high esters, almost that kind of, and I've just noticed Jeff mentioning that kind of tropical smoke was really sort of our stamp. And that's where we found it worked. But I think if that changes in the future, it's down to Alex.
So Jason says that I didn't know that is the same peated barley that St. Killian is using. Oh, so cool! That's quite
it's very possible. Yeah. So I know that obviously a lot of people would source from similar sites, and again, a lot of the specialty malts are sourced from Simpsons in the UK. But there's some there's very interesting stuff out there. If you want to do research, there's a lot of great blended Irish whiskey that are matured in either peated casks or have a small component of peat in them. There's some great putcheons out there that have a variety of different ingredients in their mash bill, and also include peat. And then there's all the kind of traditional and experimental. But it's very exciting times, I think, for the peated Irish whiskey category, which I'm hoping in 5-10 years is much more recognised, and it's not just Irish whiskey not peated, Scottish whiskey peated. That we can finally move away from this kind of misconception.
But I think there are going to be some interesting whiskies to come. I'm pretty sure of that.
Oh, for sure, definitely, yeah. And I think that when you look at how much is going on, even just in terms of what we tasted tonight, from peated, different cask expressions, with the pot still looking at different grain types, there's so much to look into.
It is. So, in order to come to an end, because we have we just nearly talked an hour, which is really cool. What is your favorite of the Teeling whiskey? It doesn't matter if it's the Core Range or Brabazoon or anything else. I would be really interested in that if you have to put your finger down there. Thinking. Robert, do you have a favorite of Teeling?
I think I will fight myself, but I think the Brabazoon 3 is my favorite. But I'm still waiting on the black pits in Sweden. We're a bit slow up north, but Brabazoon 3 is probably my favorite, I think.
Or is it not available in Sweden yet?
No, we are a bit slow. Yeah. But I'm waiting for Chris. He's prompt to run up to Sweden with a bottle. I don't know.
I would love to see that. Omar, what about you? Do you have a favorite?
Mine's actually, it's the only bottle I was able to get from auction, but it's definitely the pineapple rum cask. That is, like I said before, we all started this. the private chat. It's amazing, and if anyone can get their hands on a bottle, I'd highly recommend it.
I really need to try that. I really need to get my fingers on it.
It's good.
So Dan, what about you as a newbie to teeling? I mean, you didn't try that much like right now, but what would you say?
Well, I love the last one and the so the Pinot Noir and the Black Pit are pretty cool to me. Just because I didn't knew the Irish whiskies with peat are that cool.
I told you.
You have this fruitiness. You have the kind of buttery, I think, and then the peat as well, a little saltiness. So there are lots of flavors coming through that make the whiskey interesting.
Yeah.
And like I said, wine finishing is an interesting thing to me as well.
So I'm excited what you will say to the others. Just let me know. And Chris, do you have a favorite of teeling, or is it too hard to decide?
I'd say gun to my head, my 2 drams, like my go-to at the moment, are the Black Pits and like Robert, the Brabazon. Brabazon series and the Black Pits are my 2 Friday night drams, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, it's really sad that Brabazon comes to an end, but as every good thing, it needs to come to an end. But yeah, it's really sad. Most of the followers are like, what, Brabazon 4 is the last one, and but I think for me it's a great finish. The 4th
finish
is
on
a
the
great
high,
one.
for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know if there are any other plans to like what's coming next, or is it a secret yet?
So yeah, at the moment, there's a lot of things in place. Nothing concrete that we can say what will replace the Brabazon series. We do still have the Renaissance 3 and 4 to come out, but no, nothing concrete yet. And in terms of the Wonders of Wood, we've obviously looked at the likes of Mizunara and Cherrywood and Amberana and Ash. So yeah, Jason, I'd say there's definitely something to come on that in the future. Obviously, previously we've released now the single cask Amberana and the single cask Cherrywood, which are both available in small stock through our distillery store.
So, are there any more questions from the guests, or is everything fine for you?
No, well, I'm good. Well, given a few questions his way, I'm sure he's had enough of me.
Chris, what about you? Any other questions for the guests or for the viewers?
Any other? No, I'd say, look, if you want to learn a bit more about Teeling whiskey, feel free to reach out to myself. I'd more than happily pass you on to either the team or take you personally if you want to, learn more about us. Obviously, we've got an upcoming tasting with Robert Caldwell, our global brand ambassador, on the Renaissance series in particular. Or even if you're just looking to kill the time for Valentine's Day, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't plug it. I'm sure you can look at doing a cocktail masterclass that we have coming up. So do feel free to reach out. I'll be more than happy to get back to you as soon as possible.
So then, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed the hour and was quite interesting. Thank you for the viewers for watching us. We really had very interesting questions. Thanks for that. And I just say have a good night and have a great weekend. Bye-bye, guys.
Take care.
Cheers, guys. Thank you for having me.
Bye.